Bonjour mesdames et messieurs, in this episode I give you my 10 top best tips on shooting landscapes. Bonjour mesdames et messieurs and welcome to my photography, Lightroom and Photoshop tips. My name is Serge Ramelli, I'm a French photographer living in the beautiful city of Paris. And welcome to my 100th episode. I'm really happy, I've been doing this now for almost 2 years and I've come to 100 episode. Now, we're going to do two things very special for this number 100. The first thing is I want to ask you to help me promote my Facebook page, and in exchange, I will give you for free any of my preset package. Each costs $28. I will give them for free. All you have to do, and this is for the 100 episode, is go to my Facebook page. So you can go to Facebook and you just search for Photo Serge, or you can type in the URL Facebook/Photo Serge, and then you go to the page, you go here and you go to share. And if you get at least 20 likes, what you can do is just send me a screenshot of the 20 likes or of the post, of the sharing post that you did. You send it to support@photoserge.com. I repeat, support@photoserge.com, and I will give you for free one of my package of presets. That's the first thing. The second thing is, today I'm going to give you my best tips on shooting landscape and urban landscape. I was reviewing all my past 100 episodes and I made a list of the 10 things that worked the best for me over the last 10 years. And I'm just going to give them to you with lots of examples. I hope you will find this inspiring. One last thing before we start the tutorial, on my website I have a sale that's going on until the 28th of February. You can get 40% on all my training. All you have to do is put in the discount code 28FEB. Alright, so let's get started on this 10 tips on making urban or landscape photography. So here you go, my 10 best tips for shooting urban landscapes or general landscapes. So going down from up, I sort of try to put these tips into from like the least important to the most important, but it's a bit arbitrary. You could change them around, but you know, it just gives you a general idea. So starting with number 10, Panorama for better composition. What I mean by that, let me give you an example. I was in Los Angeles a few months back and I wanted to shoot the Walt Disney Concert Hall, which I've seen in many movies. And I always thought, if I one day go to LA, I need to shoot this building. The only problem is that the building is very close to the road. And you have around here, you've got like city lights. And so if I was trying to shoot it from across the street, I would get this in front. So that didn't work out. And if I was trying to get closer to it, like really closer to it, I would really get, you know, with a wide angle lens, I would get something really not good because it would be too much distorted. So I was like trying to figure out how could I do this. So what I did is I stood there on the road, exactly here, and I started doing a pano. So this is the first photo, which I retouched. That's the raw file totally retouched. That's the unretouched raw file. And I just, you know, put my camera into manual mode so that I would have the same exposure on each photo. You know, so what I usually do is I start in AV mode and I put like, you know, F7 or something and I look at the speed. I was on a tripod. And so I was at F8, ISO 100, and the speed was 0.6 of a second. So then I just put this value 8.0 and 0.6 of a second in my camera and started making all these shots. And so, you know, when you're very close to a big building, if you take several photos like this, then you can take one, retouch it, which is what I did, and then I can go to the develop module in Lightroom and just sync, you know, what I did on the first one, and now it's synchronized on all the others. As you have the exact same exposure, you know, you get the exact same result, and this is the final result. This is what you get once you put it into Photoshop. So this way, you know, the road I was just standing behind me was this traffic light. And so I wanted no traffic light. I just wanted the building and nothing else. And sometimes the only way to do that is with several photos, a panorama, because you will get a better result. You know, being, I was at 19 millimeter, but honestly, if I wanted to take this whole building in one photo, I should have been at 10 millimeter. The whole thing would have been completely distorted. So being at 20 millimeter and taking this, whatever it is, 5-6 photos, I got this result. And by the way, that photo was picked up by Google in November last year as the buzz of the month. And so I got like 600 comments on it. It was pretty popular. So I just wanted to share how I did it. If you want to have the full workflow on how I did this photo, you can go on my website and purchase the retouching with Photoshop. And I actually give you all the raw files and I show you the whole cycle from beginning to end. Okay, tip number 9. Always having your camera on you. That's something I do. What I do is I walk, I ride around Paris in a motorbike, and I have a Gizmo tripod, which is very small, that fits in my motorbike, and I have my camera in my bag most of the time. This is a photo of a sunset. That sunset was one of the nicest I've seen in the 8 years I've been a photographer. It lasted very little, maybe just a few seconds, but I just happened to be passing by, and I did not want to take that photo. I was just like looking. The light was like, oh my God, I don't believe it. The sky was so red. It only lasted about 40 seconds, but I pulled out my camera and I got the shot. This is another photo which I sold in galleries and became popular. That photo, the story of that photo was pretty stupid. I was just riding back home. I remember I had a very bad day. I was really bored because I was a salesman and I hated being a salesman and I wanted to be a photographer and I was sad. And so I was walking back home and I just stopped the motorbike. I had the camera on me and I walked by the Vincennes Lake, which is a lake close to Paris, and I saw these boats and I immediately pictured I could do a nice selective color photo. And so I couldn't have done it if I didn't have my camera on me. So always have your camera on you because you never know what you're going to come across. That's why also today I shoot with a Sony A7R because it's a very lightweight camera, so I can always have it on me. By the way, if you want to know how this was retouched, you can also purchase a Lightroom 4 retouching course, which gives you all the workflow on this photo. Okay, tip number 8. Bad weather equals black and white. Now check this out. This was a day it was raining. This was on the top of a bridge in Paris. That photo seemed totally unusable. But then I had this idea with the power of the raw files to turn it into an artistic black and white. And that's the result after some nice Lightroom retouching. Actually, a few minutes later, I walked around the bridge and took this photo of that same scene. It was bad weather, it was raining. And I got 2 photos of this one spot. Bad weather, I got this one photo, which is pretty cool. And then I got this other photo. So bad weather, what happens is when you have bad weather, you've got no light, no color informations because there is very little light. So everything's kind of washed out in gray. That's why taking out the colors information and going for black and white is a good idea and works really well. That's another crazy example. It's not exactly black and white, but it's sepia. That's a storm, but that's actually a full storm. I added the storm using my sky replacement course, which you can find on the website. And storm, bad weather can make interesting sepia or black and white photo. One last example. This was a very boring sky. I mean, there was nothing in the sky. And I love these stairs. They're very ancient. And I actually showed this retouching in one of my podcasts. If you check on my YouTube channel, you have the color version of it. But that's the black and white. Now, if you want to know everything to know, or at least what I know about black and white, I made actually 2 courses. I made one on my own, which is called The Art of Black and White with Lightroom, which is basically a full workflow, Lightroom only. And then I made another course in Photoshop with the master of black and white called Jean-Michel Berthe. And if you don't know anything about the man, just check out his name on the internet. He's crazy, famous photographer on black and white. And Volume 1 is amazing, The Art of Black and White Photography. This should get you started on doing pretty nice black and white. So that was tip number 8, bad weather equals black and white. Tip number 7, digital blending. You see, what happens is that our camera is basically not strong enough to capture everything in the scene. So what I usually do is I take several photos. I actually put my camera on bracketing so that I have like a +2, a normal, and a -2 exposure. And you would find how to do that actually also in my workflow course, which I will show you at the end. So this is the normal exposure, this is the underexposure, and this is the overexposure. The main idea is that this exposure is going to give me the lights here. That exposure is going to give me the sky, and that exposure is going to give me a sort of the middle values, and that's the end result. Now, this photo, you can find out how it was retouched in my podcast. If you type Serge Ramelli Digital Blending on YouTube, you should find it, and even have the raw file so you can give it a try at home. That's another one that you will find for free on YouTube. This is the normal photo, this is the underexposed photo, this is the overexposed photo, and that's the final result. This was not done in a Photomatics or in the HDR program. This was done using layers in Photoshop, and actually show you the whole workflow on this in my full workflow from shoot to retouch course, which you can find on my website. Okay, so that was tip number 7, digital blending. Basically, the idea is minimum you take a photo for the buildings. Let's say this photo, you take a photo for the buildings and you take a photo for the sky, and then you blend both of them. That's the minimum requirement. This photo was for the sky and this photo was for the statue, and that's the result. So because the reason is our camera does not have enough power to capture everything, and this way you can have everything. Anyways, tip number 6, long exposure erase people, silky water, and puffy clouds. Now, this is a photo that I took as I was coming out of the Musée d'Orsay. I was with my family on a Sunday, and I came out, and there was an interesting sky, but there was quite a few tourists. So I put on an ND filter, an ND 1000 filter on. There was like maybe 20 people, and they actually not only everybody erased. I mean, this is what? This is a 180-second exposure at f18. So I put on my tripod. I go at f18, ISO 100, and then with my ND filter 1000, what I did is I had 180 seconds of exposure. So the tourists disappeared. I had no retouching to do on that. And look at how the clouds are all stretchy. That's really cool. That's another example. That's the silky water. I love when the water is like very fuzzy and silky, and that was a 95-second exposure by Notre Dame in Paris. And this is another one. This is for erasure of elements. I remember this was the final of the Rugby Cup. It was one evening. It was loaded with cars, and I wanted to get this shot. I had some some blue hour going on. Sometimes the sky goes blue for like half an hour, 45 minutes, but like a nice blue. And so what I did is same thing. I went on a long exposure, and basically the cars just disappeared, and I hardly had to do any retouching. There was lots of cars, hundreds and hundreds of cars, but with a long exposure, they disappeared. So that was tip number 6, long exposure, erase people, silky water, and puffy clouds. Okay, tip number 5, the golden hour. Now this does not happen every day, but what happens is sometimes when the sun is down, about, I would say, an hour before sunset, you can have the sun rays straight to you, and the whole atmosphere becomes very yellow. It makes amazing photos, and that's why it's called the golden hour. That's an example in Venice. The sun was coming down. Now, if you go to my workflow course, I'll show you how you can really give justice to this, yellow colors. That's another example, shooting straight into the sun. You also will find this, if you type shooting straight into the sun onto my YouTube channel, you will find Serge Ramelli straight into the sun. You will find the raw file and how I shot this. And this was really the golden hour. The sun was coming down. It's not yet exactly sunset. It's just before, the sun was straight into my camera, and you've got this golden, feeling to it. That's one more. That's Los Angeles, California, golden hour, sun straight into my camera. So, but this type of phenomena does not happen on every sunset. You have to have, basically the whole idea is that what's important is wherever the sun is, there should be no clouds or very little clouds, and maybe a bit of clouds above you. And that's usually when you have a nice golden hour. All right, so that was tip number 5, the golden hour. Then, tip number 4, sun position. Now, it's very important. I wanted to take this shot. This shot was taken on the Pont des Arts very early in the morning, but I wanted to get the sunrise in Paris. And I didn't know actually how the sun was rising or where it was rising. So actually, there's 2 apps that I recommend that you purchase or you buy. They both have free versions. The first one is called Sunseeker. 3D augmented reality viewer. It's really cool because you can just point at what you see and you have exactly the sun position at what time. And that's really useful because I use that to plan my photos. Like basically you come to a place that you like and you can just look at it and you will find out the position of the sun for the day or the day tomorrow or in the next hours. So you know when to come back. And so that's something I use a lot. Sunseeker. The other one I use a lot is PhotoCalc. PhotoCalc, I use it because it's got a very easy, it gives you all the sunsets and all the sunrise with the exact time of start and the exact end. I use that all the time to find out, okay, what is going to be, because I always go shooting about 1 hour before sunset. So if the sunset, for example, tonight, the sunset is at 6:40 p.m., I would start shooting from 5:30 p.m. on. All right. So that is tip number 4, sun position. Find out what the sun position is and shoot. Okay, that's an important one. Tip number 3, composition, leading lines and rule of third. All right. So this is San Francisco, leading lines. Well, what is leading lines? Leading lines is lines that is gonna get you into the photo. This is famous tramway, or I think it's called tramway, in San Francisco. And you see, the thing is, in photography, it is very hard to have a dimension or depth into a photo. It is really hard. So what happens is you basically, with having these lines going into the photo, you give dimension to it. You know, it's not flat. So that's one example of leading lines. Now this one is got 2 things, and that's one thing. Let's talk about the rule of third. The whole idea of rule of third. Let me just jump to the develop module. It's an old rule that you have in painting and everywhere. Okay, let me see if I can get the grid on. Yeah, I have put tool over there on auto, and now, let me just put it on always. Okay, now I don't know if you can see it on view, but there is a grid. And so the whole idea of rule of third is that, you take one line here, so 1/3 this way, 1/3 this way, 1/3 this way. And the whole idea is you don't put your elements in the center, you put it on one of these lines. For example, you see the tram is right here on the first part of the photo, and it's more dynamic than having it in the middle. Photographer in the US, they say dead center. If you put something in the center, you're dead because it's less dynamic. So rule of third is interesting. Let me give you some more examples. So you see this is on the left side of the photo. And actually this comes also a lot from the movies. If you look at the movies, the screen being very much panoramic, the actors, they are never in the center. They are on the left or on the right. It just gives more dynamics to your photo. That's another example. You see here there is about 1/3, or actually even less than 1/3 of sky, and the rest is the land and sea. If this would be completely in the center, it would be less dynamic. Also, having this as a foreground element makes leading lines. These lines, they give dimension, because it's not flat. The eyes is going to go around this to the brighter spot of the photo. So you've got a rule of third and leading lines in that photo. But you've got something else, and that's another rule of third in some way, is foreground, middle ground, background. When you have a strong foreground like this, and you have a nice middle ground, so the foreground would be the rocks. Okay, the middle ground would be that house and these trees here. By the way, this is Cassis, next to Marseille in the south of France, a beautiful area. And the background would be the sunset. So that gives dimension to your photo. So always think, sometimes I see a lot of people taking photos where you only have the water, and basically there's no foreground. There's just water, middle ground, and background. There's no foreground. So this gives also the idea, where did I shoot this photo from? From the rocks, So that's an interesting one. That's another example of leading lines and of rule of third. If you look at it, there's only 1/3 of sky, 2/3 of the city. You can see here the street goes like this. This is not centered. This light is not centered. So you got rule of thirds going on, and you got leading lines. That's another example. Leading lines. I shot this on a long exposure, so the boats in Venice were making streaks of lights, and that really gets into the photo. And if you look at it, there is 2/3 of the city and only 1/3 of the sky. So that was tip number 3: composition, leading lines, and rule of third. Okay, tip number 2. So they really go by importance. Tip number 2 is shoot sunsets or sunrise. Okay, now sunsets or sunrise. There is a saying that, and I find this to be true 99.9% of the time. Wherever you go and you find something that looks nice, like for example, this is Venice. This is the view that you have from the San Marco Plaza, which is the main plaza in Venice. Now that's a beautiful view. It's very famous. It's all over the postcards. And if I would have shot this an hour earlier, it would be nice, but it would be less interesting. Whatever the place you go to, it will always be nicer at sunset or at sunrise. So I have a friend photographer, for example, when he makes a book, he gets up at 5, he works from 5 to 7 or 5 to 8 shooting photos, then he goes to bed until 12, and then he does his post-processing in the afternoon, and then he goes back to work at 5 or 6. And that's really, if you're doing urban landscape photography, I just don't even go in the afternoon or in the morning. I just do early morning or in the evening. And because it's always nicer, the light is always nicer. That's another example. That was an amazing sunset in Paris. This was an hour before. This photo was boring, really boring. Of course, you know, I like very saturated colors, but that's my taste. You could make this one less saturated. That's another example. You know, that's just a sunset. This was really boring also. You know, and the sunset, this place is really boring. But the sun, you know, I mean, the definition of photography is writing with the lights. So nicer is your light, nicer is going to be your scene. So sunsets and sunrise are nice lights. And so nicer is going to be your photography. I see so many people sending me photos where the composition is perfect, the subject is super interesting, but the light is boring, you know, and they have to recreate it in Lightroom or they have to force it in Photoshop. No, just take the time to find the right sunset and the right sunrise and try to make this, go back to the same place, and you will see you'll get a great photo. That's another example. I remember this was with Scott Kelby, the Mont Saint-Michel. We were driving all day. He arrived from Tampa early in the morning. I picked him up in the car, and we drove to make this photo of the Mont Saint-Michel. And it was raining and a white sky the whole way. I mean, Scott Kelby, you know, just flew, you know, thousands of miles to shoot Mont Saint-Michel. And the day he comes is a white, bad weather. And I'm not kidding. We parked the car. We drove like, it's a 4 hours drive about from Paris. We parked the car. We walked because it's quite a walk to go to the Mont Saint-Michel. And oh my God, miracle happened. I mean, just the sky just blew up and that sunset came on and we were like, thank you. And we took the shot. Now, let's talk also a bit about composition. See how there is a, you know, the whole thing makes a sort of a leading lines. You know, the water makes leading lines. There's only 1/3 of sky here, and there's actually more of the land than the sky, you know, and the shape. It's a bit in the center, but somehow this one works. Of course, rules are meant to be broken. I'm just giving you general things which have worked for me over the last 10 years, you know. And you can just break them or find your own way. But it's always good to have a, sort of a guide or an idea, you know. Okay. And rule number 1, and most important, rule number 1, and that's more important than anything else in photography, is the message. What I mean by the message is whenever you take a photo of something, you're trying to communicate something. You want, you know, you want to explain something to people. You want to say, look, for example, this is the Concorde Plaza. Now, this is a huge plaza in Paris, and it's loaded with people. I had to come there at 7 o'clock in the morning because if I had taken this shot 2 hours later, it would be crowded with people. And so the people, the tourists present, would distract me from the beauty of this plaza. Because this plaza is really nice. And having tourists there would just distract my message. So I have this whole idea that anything that's not helping your message, you have to take it out, you know, and just try to, and that's the main problem we have in photography is we have too much elements. I mean, when you take a photo, 90% of my time I find trying to find the right composition so that there is no distractive elements in the photo. Make it a graphical composition. Okay, that's another example. The San Marco Plaza, same plaza early in the morning. You know, the message is just a plaza, you know, and this is not in the middle. So the composition is kind of okay. You know, there was a nice light, but you come this 2 hours later, it's just crowded with tourists, and you don't get that message of this is a San Marco Plaza. Another example, that's the Carousel of the Louvre. This is on the Plaza of the Louvre in Paris. And I had to, I don't know if you can see, but there's some shadows. I actually did a lone exposure. There was only a few people, but I waited at least like half an hour to have the right, moment where there was not so much people. So I could, because sometimes there's so many people, you can't even erase them in Photoshop. So I think it was 1 second, and then I used my sky replacement course to replace the sky. All right, that's another example of the message. Still the San Marco Plaza, same hour, very early in the morning, totally empty. And yeah, I'm just trying to communicate one thing, the San Marco Plaza, and nothing else. This is another example. This is the dune of the Pilat next to Bordeaux in the southwest of France. Amazing place. Looks like the Sahara, but it's not. And it was loaded with people. Behind me, there is maybe 800 people. But I just, I wanted to communicate a message, and that's one of the hardest things. I wanted to get, a pano. I wanted to get the sunset on the right, and so I think I left still a few. There's a few people, if you can see here in the photo, but they're so small I didn't take them out. And this is a pretty big file because I did a huge print. This is 16,000 pixels, so that's a very big file because it was made for a huge print, many meters long, and. But it was behind me. I think I had to erase one guy here, and behind me there's 800 people. But I've seen people taking shots of this dune, and there's just, they have like people in front or garbage or things that just don't contribute to the message. Last but not least, this is again the Mont Saint-Michel. This is all about the message. There is nothing else in that photo than a nice sky and the Mont Saint-Michel. And that photo communicates nothing else than that. Right? And that's what's interesting. So, of course, the light should be nice, but, I've seen portraits with bad light that are still very interesting because it communicates just one message. And I think it's not a mistake, but the hardest thing that we have as a photographer, especially when you make urban landscape or, where it's not like a studio where in studio you can just create whatever you want. But when you're outside, you're dealing with the real world. And so you have to find an angle where you just, you just communicate what you want to communicate and nothing else. And your photo will be a lot more powerful. So voila, that is my 10 best tips after 10 years shooting landscapes and, and photography. So last but not least, I want to show you that if you're interested into going into more details how I'm doing this type of photos, I have training packages where, for example, you have my complete package, which is all the courses I ever did in 10 years. It's about 50 hours of course, about 300 raw files. Well, it's pretty expensive, but you've got everything that I ever did. It's $340 instead of $1,040. And then, I recommend you, there's one package that I recommend is really the Lightroom 5 training package and my full workflow. Because there you've got a lot of retouching on Lightroom and also a lot of retouching whenever Lightroom cannot be there with Photoshop. So if you cannot afford the full training, I advise you that. And also earlier I was talking about the sky replacement. On a few photos I showed you that I replaced the sky. Well, this is what I use, the sky replacement workflow bundle. Voila. I hope this gave you some inspiration. And don't forget, as I said at the beginning of my course, I have 40% off until February 28th. You have to put the coupon code 28FEB. Voila, I hope this was inspiring, and let's get back to the studio. All right, guys, I hope you liked this tutorial. It was really fun for me to review all these episodes over the last 2 years. And I hope it inspired you and gives you the urge to take your camera and take amazing landscape photography. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next episode. Au revoir.